morning session, Grading and Assessment in Classical Lutheran Schools, will be presented by Dr. Gabriel, who is Professor of English at Concordia University, Nebraska, and Headmaster of Trinity Academy. Please welcome Dr. Gabriel.
Thank you all for being here. I was going to tell everybody to make sure they're sitting next to somebody, but it's actually crowded enough to do that. So this is going to be a session to make sure this doesn't become nap time, because it could. But I'm going to have multiple moments in this session where you'll be turning to your neighbors and discussing. I know there's a lot of experience in the room, a lot of your own trials with grades, perhaps. And I was hoping we could all share some wisdom in some of the challenges I want to pose around grading and assessment. And then come to some possible remedies as we get to near the end of the session. I also kind of came up with this presentation for a couple reasons. I know I tend to like to write and speak on very theoretical things, and I do believe that, you know, as Lady Philosophy shows up in the in Boethius with her garment, practice does flow from theory. I do need to attend to the practice. I also wanted to prove to myself that my own resistance in frustration with grading is not simply my own laziness. So I wanted to think through some of this a little bit more. When I teach Dante, and I teach, let's say, the Inferno, one of the first things I often say, and I like to draw pictures of like his model of the cosmos, and I'll have the basic, either the basic idea of the Inferno as this pit, but it's tiered, it's stepped. And the idea that I want my students to know right away is that you don't read this wrongly. Dante is not trying to draw you a literal map of hell. And he's not trying to make you think this is for my step through the afterlife. Hopefully you're not going to hell, but so I know the way, But no, he's giving us imaginative fiction, and he's giving us this model to help us think about something now. And I think the way we do grades, they can be helpful, but they very often aren't, and people think about them wrongly. So, as headmaster of a new classical high school, I had to think about this a little bit more. I've been teaching at Concordia, and I find students who maybe are always just thinking about the grade and not the content. And that's, my first point, basically, is grades are supposed to be assessment. They are not the goal, right? And how do we encourage students to see grades as assessment and not the goal? Is one place we have to go with this. As I think about the history of assessment, especially being the headmaster of a classical school, I start to think too, well, are there other ways besides grades? Because I look back and the letter grade system that we use is a 20th century phenomenon. Tiered systems show up post-Enlightenment. And going back to our classical Christian schools, the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, we see that assessment was first primarily oral examinations. We had oral examinations in front of a master that would be, today we might call them either summative or diagnostic. We use these different terminologies, but they are making sure that the students are ready for the next level and moving on. So you see this absence of grades, and it gets you thinking, well, is there another way? We find, again, the use of assessment is to make sure that the student is ready to move to the next level, maybe earn the degree, but you don't see letter grades, and you don't see even the tiered rankings in the same way that we think about it today. You may see competitions, right? You find that competitions were used to encourage excellence, and you find that we don't have an honor roll until later, but the recognition of outstanding students was done in medieval and Renaissance schools. And for those who were not doing as well, when they walked from their seat up to the headmaster's desk, in younger forms, there was the birch, which was indeed used for that slap across the wrist. And there was a kind of disciplinary function for underachieving or misbehaving students. So that's what we see if we look back. Again, predominantly, I was asking Dr. Heath after his talk in his reading of the book about Wittenberg Latin School, what did he see in that book as they described assessments? It was the same thing, oral examinations. So I want to start my first table talk on those tables, where I want you to just turn to your neighbor or neighbors and kind of just think through quickly, because again, many of you are teachers, and I know you've thought about this. What are the problems you see with the letter grade system, and what are the benefits? So I want each conversation to have at least one of each. I want you to have a problem you see, a main problem that you see with the letter grade system that we use, and I want you to identify also what you think of as a benefit of the letter grade system. I'll give you a couple minutes, turn to your neighbor or neighbors, and come up with at least one of these. How many of you had more than one benefit that you talked about? And so I think the frustration is a common one that I've seen. What were you going to say? Sorry.
I was just saying I found a positive. I worked hard.
You worked hard. I'm glad you found one, because in many cases, right, this is a reality we're dealing with, and we're not so quickly getting rid of letter grades. But it's helpful at least to think of some benefits. Let's focus on the problems, because there are more of those. Over here, in this kind of corner of the room, does anybody want to volunteer the problem that you highlighted in your group? Yeah.
Letter grades are means to achieve money. Say somebody wants to go into a field such as doctor, lawyer, they're going to be competing for scholarships, and for them, a 4.0 on their card is far more likely to get them money so that they can achieve these degrees and achieve these fields of work they wish to enter without going into crippling debt. So it's a very real debt slavery that they're trying to work themselves out of, or keep themselves out of, by achieving a 4.0 or 3.9 GPA that can make or break full ride scholarships to Harvard or to Notre Dame, for example, or anywhere.
Is this a problem for the student's education, or for the teacher trying to hand out legitimate grades, or both? Or
both.
Yeah.
Because it's a third element.
Yes. Okay. Over here.
For elementary grades, it doesn't really tell you what they know.
Yeah.
It's limiting.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the pros that people will say for letter grades, is that they communicate more widely, where people are saying, but they don't really. And not just elementary grades, right? In college level, when we get high school transcripts, we see an A in one transcript, an A in another. They're not necessarily the same thing, right? Same thing. Yes?
Doesn't measure critical thinking. It measures your ability to kind of figure out how to get the grades. So it's like a game.
Measures technique, maybe for a shorthand. So you've got the technique right on how to get that grade. You haven't necessarily mastered the content.
Even from school to school, an A does not mean the same thing as an A from another school.
Yeah.
I worked at school A that had an 8-point system, but town B down the road had a 10-point system.
Yeah.
So 89 was a B plus over there, but it was something closer to a low B for us. And then the question is, well, why are our kids getting worse grades when it's exactly the same percentage? Which still goes to the not communicating the problem, but we're not communicating it even worse.
Yeah, and just to add to that, certain percentage ranges, right, because of grade inflation, they are wider than they really are. And so you might have the really high achieving students get like a 99%, and somebody else gets a 95%, but that's almost a very gracious 95%, but they show up both as A's. And parents and students know this.
I'm fairly new to classical education, but I'm trying to understand what my first graders need to know. Okay, it's mastery. Well, if I'm focused on mastery, then all report cards should be F's at the beginning. And A's at the end, and it doesn't show mastery to me.
Yeah. Doesn't show mastery. Right. We have the pressures of money, and we have the other pressures to not use them honestly. Let's get some from this room, this side of the room.
Yes. We talked about from the younger student standpoint, like an F range is so large,
yes.
0 to 59. So you've got a student that comes in and starts out at a 10% proficiency, and but by the end they're at a 58%, but they've got Fs all the way through.
Yes.
That doesn't show growth.
Right. So ranges can be too wide. We're trying to match a percentile system with an integer system.
Yes.
I was going to say it's creating mental health problems for high school students. So bad where they take a day off because they have such bad anxiety about testing and everything.
Right, and this is the big problem again, is the misdirected focus, right? We are focused on wrong things. And when we're focused on wrong things, it hurts us and it makes us ill. One more, yeah.
By the time the grade is assigned, it's final, and there's not anything to do about it at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year. I worked at a software company where the management always said that, took the statistics and had to say that the statistics on the workers should be the beginning of the conversation, not ever the end of the conversation.
Yeah, so, okay, the fixed nature of grades maybe doesn't go along with the idea of a formative education that we want to do. Like we're moving people along, and maybe when we give a grade, and the way they're treated in our culture it's just not appropriate to what we're doing in education. We have more, okay.
No, I'm just going off on that.
Yeah.
As a former band director, social studies teacher, so first teaching band, it was always a punishment, grade as punishment. Oh, you didn't show up? That's your zero.
Right.
But also, going back up on social studies, the letter grades come from the industrial revolution. Training kids and factory workers that don't have bells, and so forth. So it's more of a, your grade is your paycheck.
Yeah, utilitarian. Yeah. Okay, so I think we have plenty of problems, and there are more problems with the grade system that we have. And can we consider some benefits here? What is potentially good about grading? Because I've tried to raise this topic to a number of people just to see what the feedback were, and I'm often seeing frustration. That's probably the most common response. But some people surprised me. Some people who I thought, in kind of the classical world, who we like to think about things a little bit differently than everybody else. They were very surprised at my questioning of the letter grade system because they saw real value in it. And what is it? What is the value of the letter grade system? Yeah.
I enjoy grading it and giving points as much as possible into a child's work, and then entering them into a spreadsheet and going, oh, they're doing better than I thought they were, and being able to look at that growth and say, okay, everything's fine. I'm worried about nothing.
Yeah.
Because it takes a little bit out of it, like, he might be an annoying student, but he's actually a really good student, and they need to give him a break.
Okay, so in a way, you have found that it does help track. It provides a record. Yeah, it provides a record.
There's a running record, yeah.
That's
for college admissions and for people who decide on scholarships. It gives a simplified version of how students are doing. A single mark that reports what they know.
So that's just a simplified record. And again, for communication, this is supposed to be what they're for. Yeah.
I guess I'll just piggyback. It's a quick shorthand to communicate with your student as well.
Yeah.
Like just when you've got 14, 20 kids, okay, I can tell you all the shorthand how you're going on this paper.
Yeah, the communication, both internal and external, whether to the students and to their parents, right, and then externally to colleges, scholarships, things like that. It's a shorthand communication in the back, yes.
I think I realize it might be for the wrong reasons, but it's motivating to certain students in a good way.
I mean, there's something to be said for the legality of letter grade, right? It does motivate in a way. I actually raised this. My daughter and I drove up here from Nebraska, and she has cousins in South Milwaukee, and so I raised my topic to her on the way, and she said, mid-February, when I'm just not excited about school. It's cold in Nebraska. It's windy in Nebraska. It does give me a motivation. I asked her, what is good about it? This is what she said. It does give me a motivation to keep my grade up there while I'm not feeling it, you know, right? Yes.
Because our coursework is a snapshot of mastery during a certain time, there is a beginning, there's an end of the course, and we want our students to be able to show growth throughout the course, but there are just going to be some of them that won't get it until they're a little older. But what we have here is an ability to say, yeah, if a student can complete this course and get the A in it, we should be reasonably assured that they get it. But we can also show that they are not getting it in the time that we have with them for that.
Yes.
So because it is a limited system of get X amount of achievement and learning out of it, we should be honest about this is only a part of the trajectory, and it's it's simplified for record keeping there, but I think it plays heavily into the length of the course.
Yeah, there's a usefulness, and while we don't always know how everybody else is using letter grades, you know, with internally, like we can use it rightly, right? You know, that's something we can do, unless we can't. Unless we do have those larger pressures of money and transcripts and things like that, which has created the grade inflation in the world, right? Where, you know, we can't put a C on a transcript and call it average anymore, right? Yeah.
I would say that the grading system mirrors the objectivity you find in the world, because at the end of the day, you're going to run up against failure in the world, and your grades will reflect that, and you will run up with achievements, major achievements in the world, and your grades will reflect that. So the objectivity of it is good for students. And it also means that a university can say objectively, you earned this degree, or you are certified in this field of knowledge.
Yeah. So we're aiming for some kind of objectivity here, and as the first benefit noted, sometimes we might have a certain feeling about a student, and that day particularly when we're writing down their assessment or something, or maybe if we're only doing narrative, we might give some very negative narrative feedback or something. But then we collect all the grades that we have on the record over time, and we say, they're doing better than I thought, right? Okay, so...
No.
Yes.
Let me collect myself here. As a teacher, in the immediate needs, I can get feedback from students. You know, if my students are all getting C's on a particular worksheet, I can look at that and see, hey, I need to reteach my lesson here, and reassess how I'm teaching it. And then you can also take it further in what I need to reteach that lesson in. You should have raised your hand too.
If everybody is failing, that tells you something about whether it's just material that this class needs more time with, or maybe you could teach it a better way.
I see letter grades as a way as a teacher correcting themselves more than a student correcting them. So that's how I see grades.
And the opposite, because if you're only giving A's, then maybe you should teach more or faster.
Right, yeah, you find yourself only giving A's, yeah.
Yes.
But the letter grades are not necessary to that conclusion being drawn.
That's correct. Right, that's true.
It's a way.
It is a way.
So, yes, so I think we can all agree that grades should be subservient, right? The goal is education. I mean, I have to remind my college students this even, right? The goal of being in college is to be an educated person. It's not to get an A, right? And so the grades are subservient. And I use the three words that C.S. Lewis highlights in The Abolition of Man when he says, he's comparing modern education to traditional education, classical education. And he says the goal was in the past was knowledge, self-discipline, and virtue. So I like to organize my thinking around my classes around those things. You know, what's the knowledge, what's the self-discipline, what's the virtue that I'm aiming at, and I think grades can serve those goals, right? Grades can serve a kind of assessment of did they get the knowledge that they need to have. Grades can also, we're talking about motivation, they can provide a sense of discipline in a student, right? And they can provide the right recognition of excellence, and they can also provide the correct recognition of a student who's slacking, not doing anything, right? And needs to work harder. So I think they can serve self-discipline. They can also serve the virtue. I mean, there are students whose excellences, again, should be recognized. And to be very good at whatever subject you're doing, let's say you memorize a speech from Julius Caesar and you proclaimed it very well, that recognition saying it's not just pass-fail, you actually did it very well. You got an A. There's a value in recognizing the virtue. Aaron.
So, I might just be misreading this, but if I observe the benefits correctly, most of those benefits, with the exception of motivation, are not for the student's benefit, but they are rather for the teacher's benefit or the faculty, the administration's benefit.
Indeed. Good observation.
Hey.
Yes. Or in the earliest forms, you'd be one of the optimi. Yeah. So, it's true, right? And this is something we need to pay attention to, right? That grades are for communication, they're for records, they are not the goal. The problem is they very quickly become the goal in students' minds, right?
And their parents.
And their parents, yes. Because letter grades equal money. Right. So we could imagine gradeless systems, and I actually will try a little bit of this later, I think. But for the most part, I find myself, in the high school that I started, just needing to go towards letter grades right away, right? We have letter grades given, and thinking about what they're for. I've given you just a brief thumbnail of the history, but a little bit more is that they started as internal communication first, right? They're a way to speak to the students, speak to the parents, where the students are at, and the record within in the house, and it was really part of a relationship there, right? You have a student and a master that were in a personable relationship, and they work better in that kind of situation. When you're communicating personally to somebody, you did very well. You did not do as well as you could, right? And so that's where they start. This they were often actually local and idiosyncratic. So the first system by the Yale president Ezra Stiles in 1785 used Latin names like optimi, boni, peores to rank students. And this was, again, for internal communication. These were his personal records, things he shared with the student and the family. Some places they didn't even share them with the students, though. So it was internal record, but not to be seen by the students. It seemed those Latin labels seemed to be echoing older competitions that were done in the British system. Mathematical, what were they called? The mathematical competitions. I'm blanking on the name. But their main function, primarily, as I said, was internal communication. It was in the early 1800s that Yale started using the number scale 0 to 4 instead of these Latin terms, kind of the precursor of our 4.0 system. And again, when Yale did this, those numbers were kept secret from the students. It was the practice of this kind of gradation was spread to grammar schools and high schools by the mid-1800s. We had merit rolls implemented at this time, our kind of honor rolls, and one Boston principal wrote in 1856 this as the benefit and value of such things. Tell the scholars that as soon as you shall have become acquainted with, tell the scholars that as soon as you become acquainted with them, you intend to establish a merit roll, and that you cherish the hope that all, or with few exceptions, will have a claim to the front rank. So you're going to tell the students right away, there's a merit roll, and I hope you all do well. Right? But by thus showing them that they all have it in their power to distinguish themselves, whatever their scholarship, you may be able to enlist a large number of allies in your work, which will hence go on all the more prosperously because adopted cheerfully or from choice. Right? So by motivating them with the idea of competition, you'll actually have allies in the classroom. They will help you do your work of educating students. So that's, again, some of the earliest thinking about these things is internal communications, but also doing what competitions would do to help students be motivated to exceed and excel. It's in 1835 that the American Annals of Education encouraged report cards to parents. And here's a quote, the reason is to exhibit in a compendious manner the punctuality, the deportment, and comparative merit of the pupil in his recitations. So it was communication with families in these first report cards. It was only in the years after the Civil War that we get grade reports oriented to the larger external audience, where they're communicating grades. And this is in part because of the growing number of high schools. Everybody's going to high school now. And you've got this growing number of high school, usually before this point, in order to get into a college in America, the professor or master would come to the high school and interview. And you would get individual interviews for the college entrance exams, but with the number of high schools and the number of students in high school, that became less feasible, and you had the idea of a more standardized external communication through these letter grades. Eventually, skipping ahead to 1900, that's where we get the College Entrance Examination Board founded. This one I'll do more in a shorter way. Let's do this one quickly. Just very quickly, we've talked about the value for the teacher primarily. Is there a good in this external communication to colleges, for instance? Like, what is is that still important? Very briefly, turn to your neighbor. Outside of just, it happens this way, is it really something, if in an ideal situation, would we retain this? communication that you can see? Anybody? Anybody have?
Standardization-ish, it's not perfect, but just some metric that can be used on a broad scale.
Is standardization important? Is it something we need?
Good question.
The great thing about standards is there's so many to choose from.
But A doesn't mean A, it's across the board, then they have no certainty. Colleges should probably just give people tests.
Diagnostics, evaluation, on entry into the college.
But what most of us have in the ABC system are categories within the grades so that it is not only grading assessment. So yes, the SAT and ACT can see what you can do in a very level playing field, but there are people who don't test well, but who have other strengths. And when you have grade categories, which are currently part of the ABC system for most of us, I mean, I think that that part of the system is very helpful.
So the grade system allows for different kinds of assessment rather than the one kind of assessment that might be used in a diagnostic exam.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Maybe.
Yeah, so basically, we're including maybe these quizzes and these exams that are written exams. We have essays they write. We have maybe oral examinations. But we also might give a grade to things like punctuality and behavior in the classroom. Is that what you're saying?
No.
No?
But somebody can help me figure out what I'm saying.
Yes.
High stakes summative tests sometimes will make students perform badly just because of high stakes. But you could also include lower stakes assessments where students have time to express themselves and you can actually get a sense for what they know.
Okay. Yeah, so more assessments?
Or oral
lower
assessments.
But the formative, formative or more or less high stakes,
yes,
summative.
Yes. So, and one of the problems I see with, again, I understand the idea of a high stakes exam might not truly give the real quality of that student, right? Because they just did poorly on that high stakes exam, and that's not really enough. A bunch of lower stake assessments means more grades out there, and probably more grades published. And one of my thoughts is we've gotten to this problem because we publish our grades so much, and we have too many grades, and people are constantly monitoring their grades, and they have applications and websites where they can go on and see precisely where they're at all the time, and that makes them focus on those grades in an inordinate way. And so that would be my concern there. Who raised the idea of the lower stakes formative? Yeah, so is there a way around this? If you take my objection as a good one.
Is there a way around
the problem of, okay, lower stakes assessments solve the problem of just having one high stake assessment, but maybe introduce the problem of too many grades in the mind of the student and in the focus of the student, and that just exacerbates the problem of focus on the grades.
Go back to keeping them secret.
Yeah.
Keeping them secret.
Well,
Not reporting the grades to students constantly.
would it be so bad if we didn't give every single paper, every single grade a public announcement, but parents could see the overall progress that they're making?
Like on a quarterly or semester
Or
type
just-
basis?
You're allowed to check in however many times you want to check in to see your child is now getting this total, but they can't see every single assignment and every single grade and go, they have an A and they're getting a 98 overall, but how come they didn't get 100 on the last 5 tests? I don't know.
Yeah, I
Happy
mean,
that they're doing
one of my proposals is simply minimize the number of grades you publish. Minimize the number of grades that you publish. I think this is important. Yes,
I'll say I'm a college student right now, and so it's a little different than the high school grades and the parents seeing them. But I had quite a few professors last semester who didn't publish any grades, and if you wanted to see where you were at in the course, you had to go talk to them. And so no one saw their grade until the end of the semester, and I will say those classes I did so much better because I was very focused on, I didn't know what I was getting. I just had to do the absolute best I could do and see where that got me.
I'm glad you gave your story because other college students will complain about me with my So, no, but I do think that's also, they're trained to expect grades always and see the grades always, and then I do it differently, and so they don't like that. But I just think, in general, schools need to do this. I think they need to minimize the number of published grades to the students. And yes, you can talk to the teachers, you can talk to the professors. Yes. Yeah, great.
I actually had that experience because I did attend St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, a long time ago now. But at the time, they gave no grades, and I believe still don't. So in order to look at your grades, you have to go request permission to do so or talk to your professors. And everyone was treated that way. It was just part of the ethos. So I agree completely with you that the focus then becomes on what you're learning and your relationship with your fellow learners and professors and the assessment that they give you.
Yeah. And I do this differently in different levels of classes. In an introduction to literature class, which is a general education course at Concordia, Nebraska, I will publish just a few more grades. In an upper level English class, I've even gone so far as to only give one grade for the whole semester, right? And again, I'm happy to talk with students at any point if they are wanting to talk about and get narrative feedback, basically. But I try to minimize.
Now, I just wanted to bring up that it is possible, and there is a college.
Yeah, because it also
that still does this all throughout the undergraduate program.
In a way, you're also training them for the so-called real world, right? Where not everything is graded, and you have to find other benefits than somebody saying you did a really good job. I saw a bunch of hands. There was one back here. Yeah.
I was going to piggyback on this. I was recently a college student, but I didn't realize that I wasn't doing as great. So my professor would push, he wouldn't grade some of our papers until close to the midterms, and his idea for good writing was not what my other professors had. And so I thought I was doing fine because I hadn't heard anything, but then I saw the grades, and his standards for writing were much, albeit they were higher, but they were different than my other professors, and I didn't realize that that's what I needed to be expecting.
Did you learn more, learn less?
I would say I did learn more because I talked to, he gave me pointers on how to write better, but had I not seen that, I couldn't push back and do better. It was by that point it was kind of too late to do anything about it.
Right. Yeah. And again, I feel the urgency of certain, especially from certain students, about their grade has to be a certain level because they're thinking about grad school or thinking about something else next. For the most part, we're in an ideal world, right? You just say grades really don't matter, right? and the learning matters. But I do know that there's a certain utility to grades that we have to live with. Yes.
You have some objections down there.
Some objections. Who has the objection?
We have I think. What if they lack the maturity or the self-discipline to come in and to talk about their grades? Because I definitely have some high schoolers who would not be aware that they're doing terrible.
Yeah, I think at certain ages you as the teacher still have to start the conversation, and you initiate that conversation. I as a college professor, I hope there's enough maturity that people would come and communicate and talk.
Right.
But I think at certain levels you still have to start that conversation yourself as a teacher.
And then how do you transition them, though, to be ready then for college? Because if I teach high schoolers, I need to get my high schoolers ready to come to that self-realization. So at what grade do I stop
Yeah.
talking about it.
I mean, again, I would just kind of think of that as a gradual movement up into the upper levels, so you even tell them this. It is your job now to come talk to me at some point,
And then do you let them fall sometimes though?
Sometimes. Yeah, I do that. Oh, good. Yeah.
So, not much grades at the middle school, high school level. How does that go into athletic eligibility and rules like that?
I know. Athletic eligibility, yes. Hopefully, you're at an institution that.
You have a good athletic director that keeps up on those grades.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I'll have to say, I actually do have a lot of athletes who come to me because they are made to by their coaches, and come talk to me about their grades. And I'm glad the coaches make them do that.
And that's what you need.
Well,
I was going to go over here. I'm sorry, I forgot.
No, you're fine. I was thinking maybe a better way to get a true assessment of how a student is doing is to give them written examinations, because you're testing for two things. You're testing whether or not they can use grammar, logic, and rhetoric, all three elements, correctly in a paper, and they're also they are expressing more of what they know, and you can refer back to it and say, okay, this student for sure knows this, that, or the other, and that way you remove the third party of any teacher to determine, oh, this student does understand this student doesn't understand this, because you have that standard right in front of you. Or an oral examination where you just question them, interview them, talk to them,
No, I think that's another proposal, just to add another proposal, right? I think more oral examinations. I think we need to do that. In part because of AI, but yeah, I think we just maybe need to have more oral examinations. And some of these ungraded, even, right? We don't give them a grade for those oral examinations. Now, I don't think you can do that exclusively with never giving a grade, but maybe you can package a bunch of these into one grade. Like, do a bunch of oral exams, and then give a single grade on all of those. I think this is another way to do assessment without putting the focus on the wrong thing. Yes?
All right, when you say ungraded, does that mean that there's not an ABC in the top, but there still would be like feedback on there?
Yeah, ungraded, meaning no letter grade, but feedback as part of the oral examination. You might even lead with questions to areas that they really need to learn, and kind of use it as a review moment for them too.
Yeah, because that distinction is somewhat important. If something are corrected and looked over and given back to them, that is without a grade on it, that would at least solve the problem where it was problem. There wasn't the grade.
There was not enough feedback.
There was feedback, but
that's a good point. Yeah. So narrative feedback on papers in oral exams, I think that's a very good thing. And so I would encourage that. And of course, there's also the practicality of how much time can I spend with each student. But yes, I think narrative feedback is a really good thing. Yes.
Yeah, I think I got it.
Okay. We have the solution.
So can everybody in the disciplines that you teach come up with like a checklist of essentials? And I'm pretty new to classical education. I've used the word standards a few times and I've gotten dirty looks. But like a checklist of essentials. Like these are the essential things that I expect students to know if they've mastered my discipline. And maybe some of you have essentials, like you have such a broad list that some students will meet all of them. Some students will only meet some of them, but they're still A students even if they're missing this. But you have a checklist of essentials, right? And then that's what you put in front of parents. And then as the year progresses, you have assessments keyed to the different essentials that students need to demonstrate mastery of. And they'll check off on the list what they get as they go. And then I would say that each teacher or each department gets together and decides how do we, if you need letter grades, how do we translate this checklist of essential into a letter grade? So if they meet this many, if they've mastered this many, this is the grade that it becomes. If this many is this grade. Maybe some of them need all of them, it's just a straight percentage. Maybe some of them, it's not all of them.
Yeah, there's a lot to say here, I think. And okay, substitute standards with marks, and you'll make a lot more people happy. You can just say marks. There's a danger of this checklist mentality, right? And it's very similar to the danger of the letter grade system of focusing on the wrong thing, right? Or how many checks can we get becomes the focus. And this is part of higher ed accreditation, school accreditation problems too, is the bureaucratic use of these standards that it does depend how they're written. Sometimes the only focus of a standard is that it can be quantified or measurable, and not everything is measurable. I know some schools will use as objectives, they'll use truth statements, and that's a lot better than trying to say everything we're doing in this class is going to be a measurable objective. There is a lot. I know. I think I get what you're saying, but I also think there are potential problems there too with the checklist mentality. Over here.
Okay. I've been thinking about student self-assessments, and how do you feel about that? More on like a rubric basis where they self-assess themselves and how they did on a certain assignment, etc. And that is an indication of where they're at with the subject.
What would be the purpose of the self-assessment?
Well, it would tell you as a teacher what they're thinking and what they know, what they think they know, which I find more valuable experience than what I think they know.
How would you frame this to them? Because are you saying that you're self-assessing, this is really your assessment, or is it just a way to get them to notice what they're doing?
That, and for you to kind of see where you can teach better. I see grades as a way to how you can teach better.
Sure, yes.
And so we can always teach better.
Yes.
I agree with you that I think that we should show less grades. You've definitely changed my mind with that, but I also think that grades are a level of where we should improve as teachers, mostly. And so student self-assessments I find more a valuable resource too, because we want to know where they're at so that we can teach.
Yeah, I see. If you give them a self-assessment exercise, I think it can be valuable for them to reflect on thinking in a way like a teacher, right? They're kind of thinking about how would somebody else judge what I just did. And I think there is a valuable exercise there. I would try to make sure it's framed right, that it is part of the learning that they're doing is this self-assessment exercise. Yeah.
The inherent problem is that in order to know how good you are at something requires exactly the same skills as it takes to be good at that thing. So if you have no idea what you're doing, you have no idea that you have no idea what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Let me draw up a few more proposals because I'm running out of time. But okay, here's one. The one way to solve this problem some people use, and I saw this on a description of grading. It was a Catholic classical school, and they described their grading approach as resubmission of work. Right. So trying to go along with this idea of a formative education, we allow our students they have a set amount of time They get their first grade, maybe it's a D, and then they have, until the end of the semester, until the end of the academic year, to resubmit it as many times as they want.
That's a progressive trend, like 20 years
Would that solve problems? Would that complicate things?
It would make it how my high school was.
Thank you, Joe. I think this. See, I think like an English professor. I think of essays, and so yeah, you write the whole essay. If it's a Latin exam, would you just see? This is one of the problems.
Because I'm thinking in the real world, like if you're in a real world situation or you're training for a job, they're not going to make you repractice the things you already know. I mean,
Right.
That's the mastery part of it.
Sure. One of the problems I see there is actually, in some ways, some assessments are meant to be sort of the pop quiz thing, which is, I want to make sure you're at where you're supposed to be right now. Right. And, I wouldn't give you a pop quiz to redo, because now you know all the questions I'm going to ask, right? Like, the idea was to see if you did the reading. Just last night, did you do that reading? And you didn't. Okay, well that tells me something, right? So you can't redo that kind of thing. On something where you got a number of math problems, you get 70% of them right. You go work on the ones you got wrong until you get them right. I guess you can master those things you got wrong. There's a value in that, but I do think some students, a lot of students, might rely too heavily on not trying the first time. And then procrastinating. Well, I got the B out.
Tell them.
Yeah. And again, you kind of lose some of that self-discipline you're trying to aim for in a classroom. But resubmission of work is something to consider in very specific assignments, I think. I think in papers, essays, I like, at certain levels, I like to give the opportunity to write a paper and then write it again after I've given you my feedback. I think that's a very good practice in certain cases. I sort of raised this idea before, the minimal grades, but also the potential non-graded assignments. The potential for non-graded where you give feedback, but you don't actually give a letter grade to them. I think you do enough of these, they become part of the culture of your classroom. You make it almost like, usually the way when I do these are things like sort of like the discussion panels or the Socratic circle kind of things, where it's going to be your day to talk, and I don't usually give them a letter grade right after that and say that's how you did. It's just part of the culture of the classroom that you do this. Yes.
I wanted to speak to culture just a little bit. I like the idea of this minimizing grades, because as we seek to be distinct in our classical schools, I think that reducing the amount of grades you show is fighting against the immediate gratification culture that we live in. Yeah. And I think that that's good, and that might be something to reach towards.
Yeah. We are just about out of time, but I have one more thought that we've been doing at Trinity Academy, and it's a special situation because we are on campus at a university, but we have something we call Scole lunches, and our lunch hour is a true hour. We have hour-long lunch periods because we want to give students some time in the day to not be doing work. But we do actually have on at least twice a month we have a visiting professor come and eat lunch with the students on a Thursday. And we call this a Scole lunch. So we'll have Dr. Coe, our philosophy professor at Concordia, will come and talk about Aristotle's virtues with our students as over lunch, right? And it becomes this learning for its own sake moment, and appreciation of something good, true, and beautiful. And they remember these things. because it was enjoyable, informal, and I wouldn't do it all the time, right? School can't become all that. But having moments like these School Day lunches where you could have a parent or another faculty member from a different part of the school come in and speak with the students in a more informal setting, another way to just encourage that culture of pursuing knowledge, discipline, virtue, pursuing what's good, true, beautiful. Thank you.